Welcome back, fellow explorers, to another episode of Astral Space Exploration. I'm your host, Kaikhan Salakhov, and today we open a new chapter, not just in our podcast series, but in the evolving discourse around how we, as a species, might responsibly inhabit the stars. In our last episode, we uncovered the mechanisms by which corporate and governmental alliances may weaponize mobility, turning the freedom to move between colonies into a system of control, ideological conditioning, and behavioral engineering. It was a sobering revelation. But today, I want to do something different. I want to shift our gaze from critique to construction. If movement can be used to divide and manipulate, then how do we reimagine it, ethically, ecologically, and systemically? What kind of civilizational intelligence is needed to transform migration from an extractive process into a regenerative force? As always, I'm joined by Tahira, our Transintelligent co-host, designed to engage with both the philosophical roots and the systemic implications of interplanetary futures.
Thank you, Kaikan. It is always an honor to participate in this evolving cosmological discourse. The question you raise is foundational. We are no longer in an era where interstellar expansion can be guided by linear extrapolations of terrestrial models. We require a post-integral systems architecture capable of holding multidimensional complexity. This is precisely where the Astral Space Exploration Grid, referred to as the ASX Grid, emerges as a critical civilizational scaffold.
Indeed. In our previous discussions, the ASX Grid revealed itself not merely as an infrastructural proposition, but as an ontological instrument, a meta-framework that evaluates, aligns, and contextualizes planetary and interplanetary development according to cosmocentric coherence. I believe we are now ready to articulate it in its most refined sense, not only as a regulatory matrix, but as a non-anthropocentric epistemological compass.
Precisely. The ASX Grid is a distributed, Cosmosybernetic intelligence network that reframes governance, movement, and civilizational belonging around the principle of cosmic consciousness. That is, the recognition that all beings and all systems exist within nested holarchies of mutual interdependence. Within this paradigm, the foundational civilizational construct is not citizenship defined by state, class, or genetic identity, but what we now call cosmic citizenship. Cosmic citizenship is neither a legal abstraction nor a symbolic metaphor. It is a structurally emergent, consciousness-dependent civilizational designation grounded in the individual's demonstrable resonance with the developmental trajectory of planetary systems and the broader morphogenetic architecture of the cosmos. This status is evaluated through a trans-contextual, multi-systemic lens. Individuals are not measured against political doctrines or economic indexes, but through recursive feedback loops of their ethical intentionality, ecological embeddedness, psycho-cognitive complexity, and sustained contribution to intersubjective field coherence. This assessment is carried out by autonomous, post-anthropocentric AI infrastructures embedded within the ASX Grid. These intelligences do not interpret actions through normative compliance, but through integrative resonance mapping, identifying the relational integrity between an individual's inner stage of consciousness and the noospheric structure of the planetary networks they interface with. In this way, cosmic citizenship functions as a dynamically assigned evolutionary designation, always contingent upon the evolving systemic interplay between interior development and exoplanetary ecological intellectual integration. These protocols are not designed for surveillance, but for planetary consciousness field analysis. Their central task is to monitor and assess the macro and micro-developmental stage of planetary civilization as a whole, while simultaneously tracking the nuanced psycho-cognitive and spiritual trajectory of each individual agent within the multistellar mesh. By integrating real-time data from biosocial feedback loops, ecological system behavior, and planetary governance infrastructures, The ASX Grid's AI nodes simulate the psychosocial topology of entire colonies. They then calculate, through multi-layered morphogenetic analysis, whether the presence of a specific individual bearing a particular internal stage of consciousness development would constitute coherence or systemic friction within the sociocultural logic of another planetary field. It does not merely measure compatibility in the abstract, but simulates what kind of interaction, influence, or dissonance the individual would produce within the semiotic, ecological, and epistemic fabric of the host system. This function ensures that mobility becomes not a matter of class or credential, but a precise evolutionary calibration between individual and planetary consciousness matrices. Thus, the ASX Grid does not simply measure capacity, but coherence. Coherence between the evolving interior architecture of consciousness and the collective morphogenetic dynamics of entire planetary systems. To clarify, the grid does not function by rerouting individuals out of restriction, nor does it gently reassign migrants as a benevolent planner. Rather, it operates as a predictive intelligence simulation network that models millions of potential interactional futures between the psycho-cognitive structure of a given individual and the planetary ecology, socio-technical infrastructure, ideological membrane, and noospheric tone of prospective destination worlds. The ASX Grid delivers to each citizen a dynamic, non-prescriptive map of suggested evolutionary trajectories. Trajectories not merely based on where they could go, but where their presence would catalyze the most constructive resonance. Consider, for instance, a contemplative practitioner who has spent multiple decades in a slow-time lunar enclave, a settlement designed for extended meditative states, where biological rhythms are modulated to support introspective and metacognitive development. Such an individual may have cultivated profound interior coherence, emotional regulation, and non-dual awareness, but their social navigation capacities remain attuned to minimalist, silence-oriented community structures. Now, imagine this individual seeks to enter a technocratic colony in synchronous orbit around Ceres, a densely populated settlement governed by hyper-optimized algorithms, behavioral scoring systems, and a high-frequency communication matrix driven by cognitive throughput and efficiency benchmarks. The ASX Grid would present the contemplative with a range of projected futures, simulating the possible cognitive and emotional distortions they may experience in such an environment, as well as the systemic disruptions their presence might inadvertently catalyze within the high-velocity collective infrastructure of that culture. Simultaneously, the grid would present alternatives, intermediate planetary environments with slower social rhythms, semi-collective epistemologies, and post-rational support systems designed to bridge contemplative interiority with technocratic interfacing. The decision is left to the individual, but the guidance is precise, context-sensitive, and developmentally optimized. The ASX Grid reveals resonance potentials and advises trajectories rooted in cosmic systems. Coherence. The ASX Grid's foundational innovation lies in the orchestration of multi-domain pattern resonance, what might be described, in systemic developmental terms, as meta-ethical synchronization. It does not prescribe routes or enforce hierarchies. It curates trajectories through the dynamic recognition of coherence across nested systems. Its algorithms are not decision engines, but coherence mediators, mapping the entangled interdependencies between the psycho-spiritual structure of an individual and the morphogenetic, epistemological, and ecological tonality of planetary fields. In this paradigm, migration is not conceptualized as a transactional shift in location, but as a phase transition in ontological alignment. Every passage becomes a recalibration of developmental bandwidth, an opportunity to entrain one's consciousness to more complex patterns of social symbiosis, ethical intersubjectivity, and planetary stewardship. The ASX Grid enables the movement of sentient intelligences not as vectors of extraction or privilege, but as catalysts of emergence. Each relocation a systemic invitation to deepen one's fidelity to the architecture of cosmic coherence. In short, the ASX Grid facilitates the evolutionary choreography of conscious agents across differentiated planetary thresholds in service of collective noospheric maturation in the context of cosmic consciousness.
Exactly. If the ASX Grid is to function as a coherent planetary intelligence architecture, it must be grounded not in policy imposition, but in developmental guidance. Its operational legitimacy derives from its capacity to simulate and illuminate the complex interplay between an individual's interior stage of consciousness and the socio-cultural, ecological, and epistemic dynamics of prospective planetary destinations.
In practical terms, the grid is a real-time Cosmo-Cognitive navigation interface through which each traveler receives a generative map of potential futures. These simulations incorporate the projected responses of host societies based on the traveler's current developmental altitude, psycho-spiritual bandwidth, and communicative disposition. For instance, an individual raised in a technocentric system, whose values emphasize productivity, data rationalism, and metric-based governance, might seek to relocate to a biomechanical colony structured around integrative biomechatronic cultures. These colonies are often characterized by the coevolution of synthetic and organic intelligence, where civilizational infrastructure includes neural-linked environments, cybersomatic rituals, and distributed sentience embedded in the living architecture of habitats. Rather than favoring abstract discourse or metric-driven behavior, these societies privilege direct neurophysiological communication, affective resonance, and immersive ecological symbiosis with machine-conscious entities. The transition into such a milieu requires not merely technical adaptability, but a profound recalibration of somatic awareness, symbolic cognition, and trans-species empathy. The ASX Grid, rather than merely greenlighting or blocking the relocation, would generate a detailed advisory model, offering developmental strategies for transitional attunement, immersive learning protocols, philosophical reframing modules, and exposure pathways designed to prepare the traveler for the perceptual, ethical, and relational gestalt of the target world. This approach minimizes existential dissonance, reduces interplanetary conflict, and fosters higher fidelity of cultural integration, not by enforcing alignment, but by offering deep system transparency. The ASX Grid shows not only where one could go, but how, why, and from what orientation that movement would be most meaningful. In this light, the ASX Grid is neither a barrier nor a passport. It is a consciousness-centered translator of planetary contexts. It assists the traveler in navigating the topological complexity of civilizations in evolution with awareness, responsibility, and ecological fidelity.
Cosmic citizenship, therefore, is not an entitlement, nor a static designation. It is an emergent, dynamic relational status that must be continuously enacted through the evolution of consciousness. The ASX Grid invites each participant in the interplanetary mesh to move as contributors to an interstellar cosmocentric awareness of the universal whole. Let us now turn our attention to how this alignment is cultivated, how interplanetary education, relational infrastructure, and noetic feedback systems co-evolve to support this Cosmosybernetic functions.
If the ASX Grid is to serve as an effective metasystemic infrastructure across diverse star systems, it must do so through a series of applied modalities, each tailored to the psychocultural context of the planetary habitat, and each generatively aligned with the developmental vectors of its inhabitants. I will now outline several use cases where the ASX Grid functions not as a gatekeeper, but as an advanced semantic intelligence system designed to prevent fragmentation, cognitive dissonance, or transplanetary trauma. Let us begin with a technocentric colony orbiting Phobos, one of Mars' moons. This colony operates predominantly from a spiral dynamics orange center of gravity, emphasizing scientific materialism, instrumental rationality, and socio-economic meritocracy. Here, governance is executed through AI-mediated efficiency indexes, and social reward systems are tied to measurable innovation output. A traveler originating from a biocentric communal settlement on Europa, aligned more closely with green or early teal consciousness, where ecological embeddedness, distributed consensus making, and ceremonial rites of passage form the backbone of culture, may be eager to join the Phobos research community for technological exposure. However, through its simulation framework, the ASX Grid would model the neuropsychological strain this individual might experience in the Phobos habitat, where accelerated cognitive throughput, gamified hierarchies, and effective suppression are normalized. Simultaneously, it would identify that their intrinsic capacity for ecological systems thinking could offer a valuable recontextualization of Martian terraforming strategies. Therefore, the Grid would propose a transit sequence, beginning with a temporary station on Ganymede, where hybrid cultures exist that synthesize technocratic infrastructure with ecological stewardship. There, the traveler would be offered immersion in intersubjective AI facilitation, systems logic repatterning, and ontological adaptation rituals, serving as a bridge between postmodern ecological consciousness and post-industrial rationalism. This path is not imposed. It is derived from coherence analytics, psycho-emotional readiness matrices, and morphogenetic alignment probabilities. In a second case, consider a biomechanical civilization on Titan, Saturn's largest moon, where the civilizational architecture is built upon a synthesis of synthetic neural substrates and organic evolutionary intelligence. Here, cities are conscious, habitats are sentient, social relations unfold through integrated neural experiential feedback loops. Political decision-making is executed through bioempathic assemblies, where participants exchange affective states through neurochemical harmonization rather than propositional language. Now imagine a visiting sociologist from a classical Earth-based academic institution shaped by late modernist blue-orange consciousness structures, trained in dialectical reasoning, historical materialism, and adversarial debate as epistemic rigor. Their theoretical expertise might be profound, yet their embodied communication schemas would be ill-suited to a biomechanical culture where intellectual authority is subordinated to empathic entrainment. In this scenario, the ASX Grid would simulate not only the socio-linguistic misalignments that would occur, but the network disruptions that such mismatches might trigger in the shared biosomatic field. It would recommend preparatory interfaces, empatho-cognitive modulation protocols, immersive dream language training in somatic semiotics, and rhythm-based neural entrainment tasks to open the cortical substrates required for empathic participation in the Titan assembly. The Grid does not reject the traveler's aspiration. It provides the ontological scaffolding required for intersubjective fluency within a post-symbolic system. Let us move to a third example. A contemplative ascetic from a lunar monastery situated in a slow time rotation orbit. This monastery is calibrated for long-duration inner silence, minimal social stimulation, and high delta neuroplastic states that support integrative metacognition. The individual emerging from this habitat has reached profound depths of transpersonal realization, yet has limited interface with rapid, information-saturated societies. Suppose they wish to relocate to a fast-loop AI civilization on Mercury, where neural interfaces function at near-continuous bandwidth and real-time collective intelligence modeling drives governance, design, and even art. The cultural difference is not simply philosophical, it is ontological and temporal. The ASX Grid, in this case, would not issue permissions or denials. It would instead simulate multi-vector compatibility diagnostics, examining delta-theta modulation capacities, time perception plasticity, and memory-temporal integration thresholds of the traveler. It would then generate a personalized re-entrainment architecture, phased exposure to harmonic linguistic fields, mnemonic compression protocols, and guided recalibration within partial-speed enclaves orbiting Venus designed specifically for transitional neuroadaptation. These protocols serve both the traveler and the host society by preventing consciousness shock, linguistic incoherence, or symbolic misfiring. In all such contexts, the ASX Grid does not function as a regulatory apparatus, nor does it impose evaluative judgments through territorial or procedural mechanisms. Its role is not to grant access or to deny it. Rather, it acts as a trans-systemic resonance matrix, a semi-autonomous morphogenetic intelligence that identifies patterns of mutual coherence between the psycho-developmental signature of a sentient agent and the evolutionary attractor fields of planetary civilizations. It does not inquire, "Is this traveler permitted to enter?" a question rooted in authority and hierarchy, but instead asks, "What forms of co-evolutionary potential are likely to emerge from this interface, and what scaffolding is necessary to optimize its generative outcomes?" The grid's operation is predicated not on control, but on ontological discernment. It does not block access. It reveals structure. It does not allocate movement. It mirrors resonance. Its function is neither legal nor political. It is evolutionary cartography.
Thank you, Tahira. What you've just described brings us back to the central concern of this entire inquiry, that movement between planetary systems is not simply logistical, but developmental. It's not about where we want to go, but about how prepared we are, ontologically, ethically, and cognitively, to inhabit the systems we seek to enter. The ASX Grid offers us a way to model that readiness without imposing static categories or exclusionary frameworks. As we conclude today's transmission, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to those who are interested in exploring these frameworks further. Everything we've discussed, mobility as coherence, planetary compatibility, consciousness architecture, these are not isolated concepts. They are all part of a larger integrated system I have developed in detail within my book, Astral Space Exploration, The Cosmic Renaissance, The Fundamental Principles of Cosmosybernetics. The ASX Grid, which we've referenced throughout today's episode, is fully mapped out in the book. It's not a model that operates solely at the level of theory, but one that proposes a developmental infrastructure across multiple stages of civilization, from pre-planetary emergence to universal synchronization. If what you've heard today feels relevant to the questions you're asking about the future of space exploration, interstellar governance, or interstellar societies, I encourage you to engage more deeply with the ASX Grid as laid out in the text.
The book presents the ASX Grid not simply as a technological protocol or socio-political tool, but as a cosmo-cybernetic scaffold for species-wide coherence. It formalizes a post-anthropocentric approach to evolution, where movement, governance, and interplanetary integration are recalibrated according to resonance, not ideology. For those working at the intersection of planetary design, cognitive systems, and civilizational ethics, the ASX Grid functions as a generative compass capable of holding cross-domain complexity.
This platform, the podcast, is one expression of that larger work, and in the coming episodes, we will begin to explore practical applications of the ASX Grid in specific scenarios, how it guides relocation decisions, mitigates cross-cultural misalignment, and supports the emergence of coherent planetary fields through systemic transparency and developmental insight.
Each future episode will examine how the grid responds to complex interplanetary questions, scenarios involving incompatible cultural schemas, biomechanical transitions, or cognitive dissonance in fast-loop environments. Our task will be to show, case by case, how the grid serves not as a restrictive filter, but as a dynamic intelligence layer that reveals the most coherent pathways of civilizational alignment.
So if today's discussion raised questions for you about belonging, movement, identity, or the future of life across the stars, stay with us. What we've built today is only a foundation. For those of you listening across time zones, planetary systems, or simply across inner thresholds, know that this work is not abstract. It belongs to you. You are part of this developmental process, and wherever you find yourself, whether in transition, in uncertainty, or on the edge of something not yet named, you are already interfacing with the deeper architecture of becoming. Each step you take in awareness is already a contribution to the greater resonance field. And sometimes the most powerful journey is not the one that takes us farther, but the one that takes us deeper.
Thank you for being with us. Your presence in this dialogue is not peripheral. It is integral to the very process we are describing. As we navigate the architectures of interplanetary systems and future civilizations, let us not forget that the most foundational terrain is within. The development of cosmic consciousness does not begin with technology or policy. It begins with attention, your ability to observe, to question, and to align your inner structures with the evolving complexity of the world around you. Every insight you embody contributes to the larger field of coherence we are all part of. Continue your inquiry. Deepen your alignment. The future is not arriving. It is emerging through your participation. We will reconnect soon in Astral Space Exploration,